I was only a little girl when my life changed forever. People often say childhood is the sweetest part of life, filled with laughter, play, and dreams. For me, it was short, too short, as if someone had blown out the candle before it could truly shine. I remember the smell of dust after the rain in my village, the way the wind carried the sound of goats bleating, and the laughter of other children as we ran barefoot on the sand. Those are the pictures that come to my mind when I think of who I was before everything was taken from me. I loved to play with small stones, arranging them in lines and circles, pretending they were treasures. My best friend was a girl named Fatima who lived across the road. We would sit under the neem tree and weave stories about the future. She wanted to be a teacher, and I, with all the innocence of a child, dreamed of wearing a school uniform and carrying books in my arms. I had never seen inside a real classroom, but I imagined it as a magical place where knowledge was handed out like sweets. Every morning, I would help my mother fetch water from the well. The pot was heavy, but I carried it proudly because I thought helping her made me grown up. She would smile at me and tell me, "You're my strong little girl." Those words filled me with happiness. My world was small but full of light. I had no worries beyond whether the mangoes on the tree would ripen soon or if my brothers would let me join their games. But all of that was before the whispers began. I noticed my parents speaking in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening. I would see men visit our home, sit with my father, and leave with serious faces. I did not know what they were planning. I only knew that whenever I entered the room, the conversation stopped. A silence would fall, and my mother's eyes would avoid mine. One evening, I overheard my father's voice. He said, "She is young, but it is the right thing. It will bring respect to our family. The Imam has chosen her." I did not understand the meaning of his words then. I only felt a coldness inside me, as if something heavy had been placed on my chest. Days later, my mother dressed me in clothes that were far too elaborate for a child. They tied my hair, placed jewelry on me that I had never worn before, and painted my hands with henna. I thought, for a moment, that perhaps it was a festival or a celebration. I was excited at first. But then I saw the tears in my mother's eyes as she adjusted my veil. I asked her why she was crying, but she only kissed my forehead and told me to be brave. The truth unfolded slowly that day. I was not being dressed for a party. I was being prepared to marry a man I barely knew, a man old enough to be my father. He was the Imam of our village mosque, respected, feared, and powerful. He had decided that I, at the age of 10, would become his wife. I cannot describe the confusion I felt. Marriage was a word I had only heard in passing, something that belonged to grown-ups, something I could not even imagine. How could I be a wife when I still slept with a rag doll clutched in my arms? How could I leave behind the tree where I played with Fatima, the games with my brothers, the warm comfort of my mother's lap? But no one asked me. No one cared what I wanted. I was led into a room filled with people. Some smiled, some looked at me with pity, and some nodded in approval. I stood there, trembling, unable to understand the chants and blessings spoken over me. My small hands were placed in the Imam's hands, rough and large. The words of marriage were spoken, words I did not truly understand, and just like that, I was no longer a child in their eyes. They called it an honor. They said my family would gain respect. They said this was God's will, that obedience was the path of blessing. My father held his head high, proud that the Imam had chosen me. My mother wept quietly, but she said nothing. The voices of tradition and religion drowned out my tears. That night, after everyone left, I sat in the corner of the room, still wearing the heavy dress. I wanted to run back to my old life, to the mango trees, to my games, to my dreams of school. But those doors had been closed behind me. Childhood was stolen from me in a single day, wrapped in ceremony and sealed with silence. I was 10 years old. 10. And they called me a bride. When I stepped into the Imam's house for the first time, I remember holding my breath. The walls were taller than the ones back at my family home, and the rooms felt darker, heavier, as though the air itself was watching me. I was 10 years old, but at that moment I felt even smaller, like a lost bird caught in a cage that was too big to escape from, yet too small to breathe freely. The imam's house was not filled with laughter or the sound of children's footsteps. It was silent, except for the steady rhythm of prayers and the stern voice of the man I was told to call my husband. He did not smile at me. He did not look at me as a child who needed care. Instead, he looked at me as though I was something that belonged to him, a possession that had been delivered to his doorstep. Rules were spoken quickly to me, like a list I was expected to memorize overnight. You will rise early for prayers. You will not leave the house unless permitted. You will speak only when necessary. You will not question me. His voice was low but firm, and it carried the weight of command. I nodded, though I barely understood what it all meant. Inside, I wanted to ask, what about school? What about games? What about my mother? But my lips stayed closed. I already knew that questions were dangerous. I remember the first night I tried to sleep in that house. I lay on a mat, my small body trembling, my eyes searching the dark corners of the room for something familiar. But there were no dolls, no laughter, no Fatima waiting to play under the tree the next morning. Instead, there was a silence so loud it pressed against my ears, making me feel even more alone. I hugged myself tightly, whispering in my heart that maybe this was just a bad dream and that my mother would come to take me back. But the dawn came, and I was still there. The days blended into one another. I was told to act like a wife, but inside, I was still just a child. The imam would hand me tasks. Sweeping, cooking, serving guests, and though my hands were small and clumsy, I did them because I feared his anger. If I spilled water or burned the food, I would see his frown deepen, and my heart would pound with fear. I wanted to cry out, I am only 10. I should not be here. But my voice never found its way out. What confused me most was the way everyone around me behaved. Neighbors would see me and nod in approval, calling me the lucky girl chosen by the imam. Some women whispered about my family's honor being raised. Yet, no one seemed to notice that I was a child walking with eyes full of fear. No one asked if I wanted this life. The silence of the community was heavier than chains, pressing me down and making me feel invisible. There were times I caught myself wishing for simple things sitting in the dust, drawing shapes with a stick, chasing goats with my brothers, giggling with Fatima as we shared mango slices. I longed for those small joys with a hunger that was almost painful. But instead of toys, I was surrounded by pots, brooms, and expectations. Instead of being told bedtime stories, I was told to remember my duties as a wife. The cruelest part was how the lines between childhood and adulthood blurred until I felt lost in between. My body was still that of a child, but I was expected to carry the weight of a grown woman's role. At times, I would sneak into a corner of the house, sit on the floor, and pretend I was still at home, playing with stones and pretending they were treasures. I would whisper my own stories quietly so no one could hear. But even as I played, tears would fall, because deep inside, I knew I could not truly return to that life. The imam rarely spoke to me with kindness. His words were commands, his presence heavy. I tried to be obedient because disobedience brought sharp looks and, sometimes, harsh words. He never saw me as the child I was. He saw me as a wife, someone meant to serve and submit. The confusion tore me apart inside. I wanted to run back to my mother's lap, to feel her arms around me, to hear her call me her little girl again. But now, I was no one's little girl. I was his wife, whether I understood what that meant or not. Nights were the hardest. Lying in the darkness, my mind would wander. I thought of my school dreams, of wearing a uniform, of learning how to read. I thought of the games I had left behind. But then reality would return. Here I was, trapped behind locked doors, carrying a title I did not ask for. The sound of my own breathing often felt like the only proof I was still alive, still that same child hidden deep beneath all the expectations forced upon me. The silence of others cut the deepest. Everyone knew. My parents knew, the neighbors knew, the women in the village knew. But they all kept quiet. Some even congratulated me, as if this was something to celebrate. I learned quickly that my tears were mine alone to wipe away. The world had already decided what my life would be, and my voice had been erased from the story. Over time, something inside me began to change. I did not grow stronger, I grew quieter. I stopped asking questions, even in my mind. I stopped playing with invisible dolls when no one was watching. It was as though the child inside me was being buried under layers of silence and fear. And yet, deep within, a small part of me still whispered, "This is not who you are. You are still a child. You are still you." But no matter how much I whispered that to myself, the truth of my days was unchanging. I was no longer treated as a daughter or a little girl with dreams. I was a wife in a world that had no space for my childhood. That was the reality of my life inside the imam's house. Rules that crushed me, isolation that suffocated me, fear that never left my side. I wanted dolls, but I was handed duties. I wanted to play, but I was told to serve. And every night, when I closed my eyes, I prayed for a way back to the childhood that had been stolen from me, knowing in my heart that the door to that world had been locked forever. I was still trying to understand what it meant to be called a wife when the news came that I was with child. At first, I did not even understand what it meant. My body was still small, undeveloped, fragile. I had only just begun to understand myself as a girl, yet suddenly I was told I was going to become a mother. The word struck me with a kind of fear I cannot fully describe. A child carrying another child, it was something my heart could not grasp. I remember holding my belly, still flat, and whispering to myself, how can there be life inside me when I am still so young, when I still want to play, when I still want to be carried by my mother? But no one around me saw the fear in my eyes. They only spoke of duty, of blessing, of responsibility. As the days passed, my body began to change in ways that terrified me. My bones ached, my back bent under a weight it was never ready to carry. I was always tired, always dizzy. Sometimes I would sit on the edge of the mat and stare at the floor, wondering how my body, so thin and small, could survive this burden. I watched older women who were pregnant, their bodies stronger, more prepared, and I knew deep inside that I was not like them. I was still a child trying to wear the shoes of a woman that were far too big for me. The fear grew with me. Every kick inside my belly was both a miracle and a warning. I often cried quietly at night, biting my lips so no one would hear, because I did not want to anger the imam. But deep down, I prayed that God would protect me, because I felt death pressing closer with each passing month. The day of childbirth came with pain unlike anything I had ever known. It started with sharp waves that tore through my body, leaving me gasping for air. I clutched the mat, the walls, anything I could hold, but nothing could ease the agony. My cries filled the room, but instead of comfort, I was told to endure, to be strong, to bring the child into the world as though I had the strength of a grown woman. Hours passed, though to me they felt like years. My small body was not ready. The child inside me was trapped, and with every push, I felt as though I was breaking apart. The pain was so great that I begged for it to end, even if it meant I would not live. My voice cracked as I cried out for my mother, for someone to rescue me from the torment. But my mother was not there, and no rescue came. At one point, I drifted in and out of consciousness. I remember feeling a heavy silence in the room, broken only by my shallow breaths. The women around me whispered urgently, their voices filled with panic. I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew what I already felt. I was slipping away. The world blurred. My heart pounded slower, weaker. I thought of my childhood, of running barefoot in the dust, of mango trees and laughter, of Fatima's voice calling my name. I thought, is this how it ends? At 10 years old, carrying a burden too heavy, is this where my story ends? But just as the darkness began to pull me in completely, something shifted. The women rushed, voices shouting for help. I remember being lifted, carried, strange hands pressing against me, voices calling me back. There was movement, urgency, desperation. My body was torn open in ways I could not comprehend, and in the middle of the chaos, I heard the faint cry of a baby. I had survived, but only barely. The child had come into the world, and so had I, though both of us were fragile, both of us were hanging between life and death. My body felt broken, my spirit even more so. I was left weak, scarred, unable to move without pain. The women said I was lucky to be alive, that God had spared me. But as I lay there, drained and empty, I did not feel lucky. I felt hollow, like something had been taken from me that I could never get back. The days after were a blur of weakness and silence. I could not stand for long, could not carry the baby without trembling. My body had been pushed beyond its limits, and I knew I would never be the same again. The Imam did not speak much. He only looked at me as if I had fulfilled my duty, nothing more. The community praised the birth, but no one spoke of the near death, the suffering, the scars hidden beneath my skin. I was still just a girl, yet I had crossed into motherhood through fire and agony. My childhood was gone, burned away in the hours of that long, painful labor. Though my heart still longed for dolls and games, my arms now held a child, and my body carried wounds too deep to see. I had survived childbirth, but a part of me had died that day. And the child who once dreamed of school, of laughter, of a future, she was buried beneath the weight of survival. The days after childbirth felt like walking through a shadow. My body was weak, too weak to carry me. Every step sent pain through my bones. Every movement reminded me of how close I had come to death. I lay on the mat for hours, unable to rise, listening to the cries of the baby beside me. Sometimes I wanted to hold the child, to feel some kind of bond, but my arms trembled, and I feared dropping the fragile life that had come from my suffering. Other times, I looked at the baby and felt a heavy silence inside me, a numbness I could not explain. I was a child with a child, and I did not know how to love or mother when I was still longing to be mothered myself. The women around me praised my survival, called me strong, said God had spared me for a reason. But I did not feel strong. I felt empty, as though a part of me had been torn away forever. My body carried scars, but worse still were the invisible wounds inside my heart. I would stare at the ceiling and wonder if my life would always be this: pain, silence, duty. And yet, slowly, something began to stir within me. Perhaps it was the memory of my childhood, the laughter I once knew. Perhaps it was the voice of the girl I used to be, refusing to die completely. Whatever it was, it whispered to me in the quiet moments, "You are still alive. You are still here." At first, those whispers were faint. I barely believed them. But as the weeks turned into months, they grew louder. My body healed slowly, though never fully. I carried aches that never left me, reminders of that near death. But I also carried the strength of having survived what should have destroyed me. I began to ask myself questions I had once been too afraid to voice. Why was I given away at 10? Why did no one stop it? Why did my pain become invisible to everyone around me? At night, when I rocked the baby to sleep, I would think of my own stolen childhood and feel a burning inside me. For the first time, I realized that what had been done to me was not right. That realization was the seed of my survival. Though broken, I was not destroyed. Though silenced, I still had a voice. I started to notice the world differently. When women gathered, I listened to their stories, their struggles, their silence. I saw girls younger than me playing outside, their laughter like echoes of my own lost years, and my heart ached. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I would not remain silent. I would tell my story. I would let the world know what happens when childhood is stolen, when girls are forced into lives they do not choose. There were many days when hope seemed far away. Raising a child while still a child myself was not easy. I often stumbled, often felt I had nothing left to give. But each small victory, standing without pain, smiling at my baby, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, was proof that life was still inside me. I began to imagine a different future. I imagined holding a book, learning to read, discovering the world beyond my village. I imagined speaking to other girls, warning them, protecting them. I imagined freedom, not only for myself, but for those whose voices had also been stolen. The road was not easy. The Imam still saw me as property, still expected obedience. The community still praised the marriage, still silenced my pain. But inside, I had begun to build a secret strength. It was like a small fire, hidden, but slowly growing. In moments of quiet, I would think of chains breaking, of doors opening. I would picture the sunrise, soft light spilling across the land, and I would tell myself, one day, I will walk into that light. One day, I will not be silent. As time went on, I found ways to speak, even if only in whispers. I told my story to women I trusted, and their eyes widened with tears. I shared my pain with others who had lived through the same silence, and together, we found comfort. Slowly, I began to believe that my story, as heavy as it was, could carry meaning. That my survival was not just for me, but for others too. I do not claim to have healed completely. The scars remain on my body and my soul. There are nights I still wake in fear, nights when the cries of my baby remind me of the pain that brought her into this world. But alongside those scars lives resilience. Alongside the brokenness lives hope. I survived what should have ended me, and survival gave me a voice. Now, when I look at myself in the mirror, I do not see only the child who was forced into marriage, who almost died in childbirth. I see someone who endured, someone who found strength in weakness, someone who is learning, step by step, to rise. And though my path forward is uncertain, I know this: my story will not remain buried in silence. It will live as a warning, as a cry for justice, as a light for other girls still trapped in the darkness I once lived in. I was broken, yes, but I was not destroyed. And from the pieces of my pain, I am slowly building the strength to stand tall again.
Her story is one of pain, but also of survival. From being forced into marriage as a child, to nearly losing her life in childbirth, she walked through shadows that no little girl should ever know. Yet in the midst of that suffering, she survived. Her breath, her life, and her voice became proof that even when the world tries to silence a child, hope can still rise from the ruins. This is not just the story of one girl, it is a mirror reflecting the silent struggles of millions of children around the world. Her scars are real, but they are also marks of courage. Where others would have been crushed forever, she chose to rise slowly, piece by piece, gathering her strength. Her story reminds us that survival itself is a kind of victory. The fact that she lived through the storm makes her life a testimony that darkness never fully wins when even a spark of light refuses to die. And through her, that light now shines brighter, calling out to the world. But this story is not shared to bring despair, it is told to awaken hearts. It is a cry that demands action, compassion, and justice. Child marriage is not just a cultural issue, it is a crime against innocence, a theft of childhood, and a silent killer of dreams. Each time a young girl is robbed of her freedom, the world loses a future leader, a teacher, a doctor, a mother of hope. We cannot stand by while children are forced into pain in silence. We are invited, each one of us, to become part of the answer. By raising awareness, by protecting vulnerable children, by supporting organizations that fight against child marriage, and by speaking up in our own communities, we can turn her pain into power. We can transform her suffering into a movement of change. We can choose to stand in the gap where her childhood was stolen, to ensure that no other child has to endure the same. Her story has now become a seed of hope planted in us. It reminds us that the fight for justice is not impossible, and that when people unite, change is inevitable. Every voice that rises against child marriage is a step toward freedom for a girl who still wonders if anyone sees her pain. Every hand that reaches out is a lifeline to a child waiting to be rescued. And every act of compassion is a piece of her story being rewritten with hope instead of despair. So let us not allow her suffering to be in vain. Let us carry her voice with us, as a call, as a responsibility, and as a promise. A promise that children will be protected. A promise that girls will be given education, not chains. A promise that the next generation will rise free, fearless, and full of dreams. For her story is not hers alone, it belongs to millions of girls around the world. Together, we can give them back what was stolen, their childhood, their future, and their right to live in freedom and joy.